Hey, all, Kurt Sasso here from Two Geeks Talking, and you are watching the 2025 recap of Two Geeks Talking. It was a really great year overall. I didn't have as many interviews this time around as I have had in the past because I've been working on a few TV and films in 2025. So my interviews were a lot lower than normal. We had about 36 interviews in total, but every single interview we had was incredible, amazing, talented people from comics, TV, film, music, and video games. And without your support, without your coming on the show as guests, without your financial support, without everything along that line that you've helped with this show for over the past almost 19 years now, 19 years this coming August in 2026, I can't thank you enough for that. And I know you won't watch every single snippet of the 36 interviews that I have here on this particular video, but everything's chaptered down below, so take a look. And interviews are open for 2026. Look at this link here below. It's calendly.com/Two Geeks Talking. Schedule today. Schedule as early as you can. As of right now, Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's adjusted to your specific time zone. Free slots are available. Paid interviews give you a variety of options as well. Those are openings from Monday to Sunday, 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. Eastern time, adjusted for your time zone when you schedule. And go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. Like, subscribe, and share the channel with people that you think would benefit from the interviews that we have on the show. Thank you again for all of your support, and I look forward to interviewing you in 2026. Well, then let's talk about influences when it comes to this particular genre of music that you are creating here. You know, if you could get into a studio and collab with any three artists, live or dead, who would they be and why?
XXXTentacion, he really kind of influenced me to take this type of style, to do more emotional music with like vulnerability connected to it. Definitely Kid Cudi, because same thing. I just love his music so much. And he's one of the people, everyone I'm saying has inspired me to do music in some way. And then Michael Jackson. It's Michael Jackson.
Yeah, that's just a given.
Yeah, self-explanatory for that one.
It's going to be a sad day when kids of the younger generation don't know who Michael Jackson is.
Yeah, man. Yeah, my niece doesn't even know who he is already. It's like she'll be like, play the zombie song. I'm like, Thriller? What are we talking about?
Especially from a TV film side of things, fun to do that, but it's also hard to get produced and get it out into the eyes. The fact that we have so many different streaming platforms, how are you trying to get your content in front of those masses and fight through a niche that isn't quite filled yet?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just saying, hey, what is the niche now? What's the hot niche? Because it's changes so much. What I'm starting to see now is a big pickup with manga. There's a huge interest, obviously, with anime. Anime has exploded, and I'm so grateful because a lot of the shows that I really didn't catch the first time around, like a lot of Gundam, I've kind of gone back and looked at now, and I'm excited because it's been great. I'm an old Robotech fan, so Gundam and Robotech kind of go hand in hand as far as the storytelling elements in my mind. We're starting to produce some manga titles. Chris McCauley, who is author of the Stokerverse, which is basically from Bram Stoker's series of vampires and things like that. He's actually a part of that little work group that has put out comics. He actually brought over his big fighting robot series called Nexus Astrum, which you guys can anticipate coming out very soon from us in our approach now to being a hybrid publisher. But we just finished up that comic book, so that's complete. Really great team I paired him with, Leo Rodriguez and his team of animators. They did a fantastic job on that comic book. So we're excited to jump into that arena and start going out to some of these conventions that are a little bit more skewed to the anime fan base. And that way we can tap into that.
Everyone usually asks, what's the wisest piece of advice or what's the most BS piece of advice you've ever received? But what is the second wisest piece of advice you've received that has stuck with you in your career?
I don't know if this is second or first, quite frankly, but one of the most memorable, former voiceover agent turned entrepreneur. As a voiceover artist, it was hard on the outside looking in, trying to force my way into the speakers circuit. I remember Liz telling me, someone's endorsement of you, or lack thereof, has very little to do with your trajectory. I had to stop and go, wait, say that again? And she said it again, and it was so memorable. So as an author, you can get hung up on a bad review, or you can get hung up on whether people are buying your books or not. This phrase comes in such handy as an author. Someone's endorsement of you, meaning buying your books or leaving you a bad review or whatever, has very little to do with your trajectory. My trajectory, such a hard word. As a voiceover artist, I should have that. Trajectory is forward, is up, regardless of what people say. That's the mindset that you have to adopt, hold on to.
How do these abilities and powers help you not only as a writer, but how do they help the readers that are actually consuming your books en masse?
I would hope that it's sort of a gateway to therapy. I've had to deal with these issues, like I say, in my own world, and I've had to deal with them both with and without insurance, meaning with and without therapy. I've had help when I could afford it, and I've had to deal without help when I couldn't. And I thought, since I'm kind of putting a little bit of myself into each of these books, this would be a way to give myself some free therapy by converting my personal traumas into this fictional universe, maybe also help show people it's okay to not be okay and seek help where and when you can. There are resources for people who don't have the money to afford in-person therapy. I'm trying to show there's a physical manifestation of Hunter's depression that features prominently in this book, and I wanted to show we all have that. We all have some sort of manifestation of our mental troubles, and I'm hoping that I'm doing this concept justice, showing people, it's okay to talk about these things.
I wouldn't say I've got a career yet. I'm still working on trying to create a career. But mind you, you're never going to be happy. So, I mean, and I guess that's one of the most interesting bits of advice I've got from podcasts, from interviews, from anything. And that forwards on, not even just to work, that's life in general. You're never going to be happy. You get to that goal. All that happens when you reach a goal is you want more. You get to a comic, an image, and you're going to be like, oh, I really want to work at Dark Horse now, or I really want my Preacher, my seminal work, my Sandman. You're never going to be happy. So just be happy, I guess. Just keep striving, be happy. You're already there. I don't care what anyone says. It's not the goal, the journey, man. And it's taken me a long time to realize that. And I'm still not happy, but I try to be, and I try to be mindful and just keep thinking about that.
Why the shift now to short form content and promoting the book in that respect? Is it something you've wanted to do but didn't have the time?
That's a good question. There is just more success in the short form. Algorithms are meant to reinforce people who watch an entire video. And if you have a minute long video, that's too long. And it is in my nature to go on and on and on and on and on. So long form is natural for me, not as reinforcing in terms of online success. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll come up with a topic to record and speak on, and then I will cut it down into 2 different videos because it needed to be shorter anyway. Requires me to be less indulgent with what I think a viewership needs to hear. It is also easier for me when I have a single book that I have to promote. I see a lot of authors online, they're promoting different books, and that's great. I'm going to do this today, I'm going to go to this other story tomorrow, and it's not going to be monotonous. There's only so many times I can show people the cover to my book before I start to feel like I've got nothing new to say. Creating just short form videos allows me to create more conversation starters, I think, or more of an orientation without it being static like it would be in a bunch of still images, and without it being monotonous like it would in long form videos. But I've been shifting back and forth between black and white videos and color videos. That is not even strategic. I just kind of like the way it looks. People look at an entire feed, and I think if you see all one thing, I like a lot of diversity. Everybody else is like, you should have a little more consistency. I like there to be some options, particularly when I'm trying to strike this tone of writing to a horror thriller audience, but wanting to create content that isn't full of despair. Yeah, the black and white versus the full color.
The creative process as a writer, the fact that you've been writing for so many years, the fact that you personally live your experiences to write your books, which is rather a method acting approach or method writing approach in terms of getting to the heart of a matter there. That doesn't always work for everyone, though. But why has it worked for you specifically?
Oh God, if I could answer that question. Why to me? I think that everybody is wired differently, Kurt. I've always been wired to want to know things firsthand. Now, that is not to say that I don't love researching things, but I did always feel that to really know something, to trust that I got it right, I would have to see it for myself. Missouri is the show me state, and I guess I'm the show me guy. I just like to know what I'm talking about. And I think that it's not just about being there and perceiving, because journalists go places and perceive things. It's about literally immersing yourself into something, feeling in a way that you have no life. It's not the guy who has the life jacket who's really going to write about swimming or swimming in the ocean. It's the one who doesn't. It's the one who's driven by desperation to really feel the thing, to feel what it's like. That's how it has been for me. I've always felt that that's the thing I could trust. And, some of it is, who are your influences? When I was growing up, I just loved writers like Albert Camus, who was obviously writing from his own experience, even though he wasn't Meursault, the stranger. You could tell that he had thought about the problem of being Meursault. He had actually worked it out in his own mind. I always loved Henry Miller, because Henry Miller was like a guy sitting on the next stool at the bar, recounting his life. And I always liked that. I always liked the writer who could talk to you like he was really talking to you, that it was really his experience. And conversely, I don't like writers who take an attitude or a pose because it's an easy one to take. For instance, a writer who's going to write from a position of anger or criticism, just almost knee-jerk criticism, to me, that's weak. Why? Because any actor will tell you this. Anger is the easiest choice to make when you're playing a character. It's easy to be angry. It's easy to be angry and to be committed to that. And for some reason, we just fall. It's harder to be sensitive. It's harder to be vulnerable because those are nuances. Those are things you really have to feel. They're not things that you can glom onto because you've seen somebody be that way.
What's funny? I wrote this originally on 3x5 cards, 2018 when I started writing this. And I was using a 3x5 card method, which I found for writing screenplay, which was interesting because you could think of all these different things that could happen in your world, and then you can shuffle them around. And then you can find where it's supposed to go. Oh, I had a new idea, and you can shuffle it in where it belongs in the deck without having to rewrite a script. And so that was my first draft, was just making all these ideas and how to fit them together. I treat it like a screenplay. We have an act 1, an act 2, and an act 3. And so we have the big story, so all 36 together. And then we have within the 12, there's an act 1, an act 2, and act 3. And then within each issue, we always have action, we have some exposition, we got to have some character development, and then we're off to the next issue. We're usually with the cliffhanger. It is a lot to kind of keep track of, but it's all in here. It's all in paper and in my 3x5 cards somewhere.
Once you start getting into interactive elements of video clips or audio or imagery, half the time you're spending scouring the internet if you don't have access to whatever you're trying to find, and making it engaging too. I think that's the most difficult part about keeping an audience's attention, especially this day and age, because everyone's used to the quick 1-minute shorts. No one's going to sit through a 30-minute interview or a 30-minute episode unless they're actively engaged in what you're doing. And as a host, obviously it has to be a struggle sometimes, but how do you keep positive when it comes to, sticking with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, there's periods, wax and wanes of interest or energy level. I guess the interest is always there. It's the energy level that can be consuming sometimes. How I stay positive is definitely making sure the work that I do does not sort of drain me in any kind of way. And when I feel that being draining a little bit, I do take a step back and say, okay, today I'm not even going to touch anything. I just need to go outside and touch grass, as they say. Then I have those moments where I dive in. 3-4 hours of work has gone by in a microsecond. Doing those episodes is time consuming, but I also do daily shorts on YouTube, and I prepare those well in advance. So that takes time as well, even though those are 15, 20, 30-second clips. The other thing I do to try to keep the audience engaged is understanding the analytics of the data that I'm looking at that YouTube provides to show me this is where you're seeing drop-offs, this is where, you're seeing some issues, and adjusting as I go forward. I don't necessarily adjust the content, but I adjust how I present it, how I try to be engaging up front. I try to make sure that the story has a strong hook, that the messaging has a strong hook. Yeah, I think it's important to listen. Actually, a writer came back to me when I asked for an interview, and he said, "Hey, I watched a couple of your videos. I'm a professional writer. Do you mind if I, critique your work?" And I said, "Go for it." And he said, "Sometimes you got to kill your darlings." And what he meant is, I see you have a really strong passion, but you need to make this punchier in this spot, this part, maybe you don't need it, that kind of thing. And I know you wrote it, so it's your darling, but sometimes you do need to kill your darlings and say, okay, I'm cutting this out, I'm moving this around. And I found myself doing that and going back to that thought every time. That advice really sticks with me.
How do you get the big guests you've always wanted to interview?
I mean, obviously, there's a few ways to do it, depending on what your industry you're looking at: comic books, film, television, music, whatever. First, I believe in what I call the ladder approach. You need to build trust first with the people, the companies, corporations, publicists you're trying to connect with. Jason Momoa is probably shouldn't be your first introduction. I'm gonna be like, hey, let's go for your biggest name. They're first off, who the hell are you? Second, keep your emails short and to the point. They don't have a lot of time. They have about 10, 15 seconds to figure out who you are, if you're worth their time, and what kind of person or individual you are that could potentially interview their client. Keep your email short, sweet, with the key information: who you are, what do you want to talk to these people about, who have you interviewed in the past, what kind of interview is going to be, is it Zoom, is it in person, and the email, be done with it. But start with what I call the ladder approach. Build their trust, talk to the individual, you're more likely to get that yes, and now you're in the door. The more you're in the door, the better they get to know you, the more likely they're going to take the risk on you to put their better clients on your show. Comic books as well. Talk to the publicists of DC, like DC or Marvel, or well, Image doesn't really do much on their end, but DC and Marvel. And don't start off with, hey, can I have Jeff Johns for an interview? No, ask for a guy writing the book with only 10,000 copies being sold. They'll be more likely to say yes because no one's reading their book anyway. And then you build the rapport and you keep going. But the key is, beyond the latter approach, is treat every guest you have as if they are the Jason Momoa for that interview. Do not ever seem disrespectful or bored or half-ass any guest you get, because that will keep you from ever getting that guest you truly want. I guess that's I mean, there's more details obviously than that, but for the purpose of the show, we can leave it to that for now.
I want to jump in on this because, first of all, yay, I agree with you completely. And IMDb Pro is a phenomenal resource. So thank you for pointing that out. I also want to say a couple of things. First of all, one of the things that I'm very lucky to have is that the PR pros have found me. So I get about 30 to 40 pitches a day from people who want to be on the show, which is lovely. And yet, you need to have some sort of an infrastructure that when someone wants to be on your show, I have a little form that they have to fill out to tell me how they're going to sort of fit the mission of my show. That's something that's really important as far as I'm concerned, right? I want them to fill my show with the things that my audience wants to hear, in addition to having great guests. So I do that. I go, okay, this is what I want. This is how I'm going to want you to fill it out, blah, blah, blah. So that's part of it, is have an infrastructure for treating your guests professionally and making sure that they're going to be a good fit for your show and your show's going to be a good fit for them. I also have a PR pro thing, a little deck that I put together for PR pros so that they know the kind of guests I want them to pitch me. I don't want someone, I'm vegan. So for example, with that, I don't want anybody who's in the animal industry. No matter what you do, if you use animals for anything, I'm not going to want to talk to you. So I have had to train the PR pros themselves to go, okay, she doesn't want to talk to anybody like that, but I have this person who's a best-selling author. Great, I want to talk to you, right? So they now know. I work with, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 PR firms. They know who to pitch me. So I trained them to do that. And there's a deck that I have to do that. The other part of it is when a guest has a great time, and I agree with you completely, Jeff, that do what you absolutely can to make sure that the guest is just thrilled with their experience. I ask them, is there anybody you think I need to have on my show? And I've gotten some phenomenal guests just from asking that question at the end of our chat. Just like, who do you know who would be interested in coming on the show and talking about their creative process? Whoever they are, Grammy winners, Tony winners, doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is, are they interested in being on a show to talk about this stuff and their own inspiration? And so I ask guests, I ask people I meet in the street. I had a phenomenal Grammy winner, Odyssey, who's a rap artist. I was sitting at a restaurant outside here in Brooklyn, heard a guy talking about the fact that he was going on tour. And I literally stopped him and I said, "Hey, I don't know who you are. Who are you?" And he told me his name is Odyssey. He's a music producer and artist, and he's traveling the world rapping. That's what he does. And I'm like, "I need you on my show." He's been on the show, and he got me new people to be on my show. Right. So that's another way to do it. Don't be afraid. Have your business card or your digital business card ready. If you are out there and you hear someone talking about something that has something to do with your show or your interests, introduce yourself, talk to them, see if they'd be a good fit or if they know people who'd be a good fit.
I want to point to Jay because he is behind the scenes of the James Altucher show, and they book a ton of like famous celebrity types. So you've got to give us some insight into how you get the guests.
Well, I think I was lucky. I have to attribute to my luck and my boss as well, because my James already have a big following, so it's easier to get guests on the show. But a couple things that I have done is that no matter if I know if that guest's gonna come on the show before or if he's gonna say yes or no, I always like, hey, I always reach out. So let's say we have someone that came on the show before, or I know someone that I want them to be on the show. If anything's happened in their life, let's say they just got married or they just have a baby or anything, always just reach out and say, hey, congratulations, have this, blah, 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 build a rapport, build like some sort of connections and network a little bit. Also going to different conferences and meeting different people, that helps too. Even on social media, I think Reena do the same too. Like on social media, if you follow Brian Keating, you respond to Brian Keating's post or like comment. So start building rapport with them that way. Doesn't matter on Instagram, Twitter, or anything. Just go and report. Know that, hey, this person exists and this person is not a bot that just follow my account. Then that way, building that rapport can sort of help you land the guest.
Yeah, I want to piggyback a little bit onto that. Brian Keating is how I got to you, Jay, because he introduced us. I think I was working for Kathy Heller and like she was wanting me to reach out to James Altucher to be on her show, but that didn't first come together. And then I saw that somebody I was connected to was connected to James, and then I ended up through Brian connecting me to you, getting James on my show. So, there has to be, I feel like, a lot of touch points if you want to get somebody famous. Like, it took me a year and a half to actually get Jerry Springer on my show, and I was connected to his publicist. So I got yes, I got no, I got yes, I got no. But one thing that you said that is so, so true. If somebody has a baby, congratulate them on that. If they are going on a book tour, say, hey, I'd love to read your book and have you on if you're looking to be on a podcast. So I also think like sharing their content and actually listening to their content, you can find something to add on to the conversation that they're already having. And I feel like that works really well. I got Katie Couric to share me because I went to one of her events and she saw me in the audience taking picture and, quoting people from the event. And then I share her stuff. I listen to her stuff. And then she was like, oh, wow, this chick is actually like a fan.
No, I love that. The fact that there's social media presence, the fact that you're providing a human touch, a human connection to this content, whether you're a fan or whether you're trying to get a guest. The interest factor is a key aspect of it. And once you dive down the rabbit hole, you might find common interests that you didn't realize you had based on their celebrity persona versus, their themselves as an actual person. So I think that's a wonderful connection to have overall.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit on that is that I think Jordan Harbinger from, the Jordan Harbinger show told us this before, or at least on the James Altucher show, what he said that like, you make sure you personalize every interactions with the person, even though it's on social media. Don't just say, hey, congratulations on your baby. Just say, hey, I remember blah, blah, blah. I remember talking about you have like your wife was pregnant for how long, congratulations on the baby. I hope you sleep well. I hope you get to sleep often and stuff like that. Yeah. So personalize the response and the interactions doesn't, that helps as well.
Lots of people out there who are keen to give you advice on what you're doing, because music is such a personal thing and sort of creates such strong feelings in people, that there are a lot of people out there who are happy to offer their opinion. That can be a very enlightening experience sometimes. A piece of advice that has stuck with me the most, I was working with a producer called Phil Leppanen, who was in a punk band in the 80s, and he works out of a recording studio near London Bridge. It was the first time I had recorded anything. And it was the first time I'd had a song, and I said, I want to record them. I want to put them on record. And I had all these questions, and I had all this anxiety, and I had all this trepidation over how that was going to pan out, and what he was going to do with the songs, and how they were going to sound. But mainly because I didn't have the experience at that point. There was a lot of sort of uncertainty there over what I was doing, basically, what I was going to do with these songs. Phil, he said to me, just record the music. That's all you have to do. Just come into the studio, sit down, play the guitar, and sing the songs. And that's all you have to do. And that was probably the best advice that I've had so far about recording music. That would be the thing I would tell people, is not to worry about what else is going on around you. Whatever else is going on around you, don't worry about it. Just focus on getting the music out, and all the rest will come after that.
Especially from the listener's experience, especially because you've been so in tune with audio and podcasting for as long as you have here. What's one trend in podcasting, whether in content, format, or technology, that you think is underrated but could revolutionize the medium?
Underrated, huh? Can I say something that's overrated first? Then I would think about underrated. Overrated thing is everyone wants to sound like a radio host. Yeah, I don't know if you heard a lot of the podcasts, you just heard a ton of big bass and then very, very compressed signal. It's like everything is in your face. It's like the host is in your face. I can't stand the audio quality anymore. The reason why it was that way back then, because it was FM. So FM can only carry a very small or very limited amount of frequency and bandwidth. So they have to make sure they can squash as much frequency as possible, as much information as possible into that one wave that can carry the FM wave to, richer speakers. Back then, there's nothing called bass boost, right? Back then, the speakers all sound like crap. They sound like they have no bass. So what happened is they have to crank up the bass more so they can hear the bass on their speakers. And nowadays, everything is bass boost. Go into a car, boost the bass, put on the AirPod, boost the bass, go onto Spotify, boost the bass. So you don't really need to do that anymore. You don't really have to sound in your face as how it is before. What I think is underrated is the dynamic. Everyone here, including me and you, on the podcast, we are telling a story. So when we're telling a story, we need dynamic. Your volume doesn't just stay the same. So you need some fluctuations in your volume. So the dynamics, which I think more people should realize it. Yes, you have to sort of control your dynamic as well. You can't be too soft and no one can hear it. Or you can't be too loud and everything just crank up and blast your ear. So you have to sort of manage it. But having dynamic, you sort of grab other people's attentions, because when I stop speaking softer, you'll be like, oh shit, what's going on? Also, more people need to use pauses. I know I rarely pause. More people will use pauses. I think, I don't remember what article that I read somewhere that pauses are the best way to grab attention. So let's say you were younger and you were in a classroom, right? Like second grade or whatever. Your teacher is giving lessons and then everyone was chatting and talking. All of a sudden, when your teacher stopped talking and be silent, and then you can hear the room sort of just become quieter and just silence, and everyone just look at the teacher. Utilizing the pauses, the silence, and the dynamic can really help you create a more robust or more interesting or attention-grabbing podcast.
I like to tell people that I don't write heroes and villains. I write protagonists and antagonists, and I leave it up to the reader to decide who's heroic and who's villainous, because I think the best villains all think they're doing things for the right reasons. The ending of Angel Hunter is probably 6-7 years down the road, so I don't have to worry about missing that mark just yet. But yeah, my characters, they tell me who they are, they tell me where they're going. The funny story, I thought I was on a video call with Les Garner, who's the artist and co-creator of Angel Hunter. He was asking me something about, okay, well, blah 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 is gonna, this character's here, and blah blah blah. What's gonna happen, later on? I'm like, I don't know, haven't told me. And Les just froze, and his jaw just dropped, and he's like, if it were any other person but you, I would be worried right now, Rich, but I know you know what you're doing. It's going to be fine. But goddamn, figure it out. I believe floppies are dead when it comes to independent and creator-owned comics. I do own a comic book store, Wonderland Comics. I own a comic book store. I've owned comic book stores since 2007. I've noticed a trend that floppy sales for independent comics are dropping and dropping and dropping. It's hard as hell to sell an indie book as a floppy. Trade paperbacks, I can't keep them on the shelves. Those, especially those $9.99 Image Volume 1s, no exaggeration, they represent about 63% of my total orders throughout the entire year goes to trade paperbacks, graphic novels, hardcovers. It's almost 2/3. And that's what my sales are. So when we were putting together the concept to do Angel Hunter, and I've also learned over having, now my 4th comic book series in comic book stores everywhere, the floppy sales, they do nothing but suck away your profits, because you're paying these print costs and you're paying them for every issue. And every issue, you're going to be printing fewer books, which means that it's going to be more expensive every time to print, because the fewer copies you print, the more expensive it is. The economics of floppies just don't make sense to me anymore.
Because you put yourself into gaming, into poker, into your work as heavily as you do, does creative burnout happen for you?
Yes, yeah, it does. These books, I honestly had thought that I'd tried and failed at writing fiction. I've got about a dozen, probably about 6 books in the bottom drawer that didn't make it to the light of day. Some were written back in my 20s. One of which was good, and there's a producer here in town who really loves it. So every time we meet, he said, "What happened to that one?" And that would be a sort of young adult's story based on a Nepalese legend. My father was a Gurkha officer in the Second World War. He wasn't a professional soldier, but he was 6 years an officer. So, and he got to know the Gurkhas very well and spoke Nepali, various branches of it. And so he told me this myth, and I thought that'd make a great story. So that was probably the nearest, the one that I thought, oh, well, that deserved to see the light of day. But the others were basically just learning the craft. And then when I had the idea for New Rock, New Roll, it was just years since I'd written or attempted to write a book, and it just opened up. And that's kind of a relief, because I'd sort of parked it. I said, okay, I've had a decent career as a script writer, as a writer of opera, libretti, as as director and lyricist, and I've made a living doing it, which is unusual. And so maybe book writing isn't my thing, even though I'd written some narrative non-fiction books. And then this thing fell out of the sky, and so I finished the first draft and sent it off to my agent. And as always, it takes an agent a couple of months to get around to reading something. I just wanted to know what happened next. So when she called up and said, "This is exactly what people want. It's escapism, it's fun, it's light, it's adventure. If things go terribly wrong, it's a serious adventure with high stakes, but there's comic touches." She said, "This is just what people want." And I said, "Oh, well, that's nice, because I'm, well into the sequel." And she said, "Oh, right, 3-book deal." Like, oh, 3 now, is it? So that's the way it rolls on. And I realized that this is expanding from book to book to book. And so, of course, you get to the end of one bit and you go back and plot the beginning of it and plan and plot and weave it all together so that the books all fit together. But it's been a huge relief actually to write something that I'm confident is good, because I wouldn't want anything. If book 5 isn't as good as books 1, 2, 3, and 4, it's not going to see the light of day. If I can't get it up to that standard, I'm not interested in just pot boilering for the sake of it. It's got to fruition. It's got to come to fruition. It's got to deliver and deliver in really in emotional terms for the reader and for me. So we'll see. Who knows?
Do you find a lot of series nowadays, whether it's comics or whether it's TV or film, just either give everything away with trailers, or the fact that they over-explain things to the point of, why am I watching this?
100%. Yes. Yeah, they absolutely do that. And I think it's no trust in the audience, right? And that's something that I think pulp does pretty well, is that it knows their readers, right? It knows that not only do you probably know where this is headed in some sense, and I'm going to play with that, right? And that's the best part, is when people understand that we all have a common narrative and we all kind of know where stories are headed based on what you set up. And if you can twist that, and if you can change that, that's where the best stories come in. Trailers are, I think it's a difference of the creative and the marketing. Although trailers are creative in their own way, marketers don't necessarily trust audiences to figure it out on their own. And it's, if I have to give away the ending, then so be it, right? I think, what was it, Captain America recently was the best example of that. As you're walking into the theater, there's a big poster of Red Hulk waiting for you, and it happens to be the big surprise in the end of the film. Like, there's absolutely no trust to sit and experience something. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah, still happening.
But how can comic creators, whether they're indie or professionals, protect themselves from an AI standpoint? Just a couple of points.
So I've been looking into this because I got all of my comics scraped, and also quite a lot of my fine art pieces as well, hundreds of pieces. And it felt really violating, like, particularly when you find out what happens then is they just get added to the pile, which is just so disrespectful. And there's zero consent. In my case, all of my work was taken from my own website. So, people are often quite like, oh, well, if you don't want to get scraped, then don't put it on social media and that sort of thing. It's like my own website with very clear, copyright statement on it. They scraped it off that, so nowhere is safe. There are a few things you can do at the moment, which is there are a few kind of filters that you can put on, which are called Nightshade and Glaze. So Nightshade is an AI poison that is designed to kind of disrupt the image recognition so that they essentially get it wrong and have weird outputs. And Glaze is a protective filter that is supposed to disrupt them sort of taking it at all. One of the problems with this is that it tends to make your art look kind of funky and not entirely how you might want it to look. It actually works slightly better on kind of very painterly projects because it blends in a bit more. But artwork that's very kind of smooth, it makes look kind of rough. There's also I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's an AI trap where it's kind of like a link trap that you can kind of send them through, where it'll be, the robots will be looking at your website and it will follow this link that will give it a lot of trash into its algorithm. Nice. So that's another way you can protect your work, or at least make it more difficult for AI to replicate it, because it will have a lot of trash in its system. Nice. I think that's mostly it. You can put in your robot's text something that says, no, I don't grant permission for AI. But the problem is that I'm not sure how much attention is paid to that, and websites will probably get scraped regardless. And in many cases it has happened already. and they've already not got permission. So, and in my case, with Epic Fail, I've stopped updating online for now, and I'm thinking I will probably just like put all the comics into a book and do them in a Kickstarter, so that the new comics are not going to get scraped from that. And it's just a case of following the law, which, to be honest, the copyright law basically is on the artist's side. It just needs to be enforced, in my opinion, which is that if somebody is using your artwork in their software, which is what is happening, then they are A, supposed to have permission, and B, supposed to pay you. That is what needs to be enforced here.
What's a piece of advice you ignored that you now swear by?
To not get out of your comfort zone. Like there's a few of my friends who didn't want to get out of doing traditional. I was one of those people who thought, I could do traditional and it'll be all right. But like once I found out like I could do better with digital art and make my artwork and my word art and my lettering and my characters look even better, I decided to jump into digital, and it's been a total different ball game. So yeah, that's one of the advices. Like you got to step out of your comfort zone. Like if you're a traditional artist, definitely try digital art because it'll help enhance what you already have. So that's one of the things I started doing when I first got Procreate on my tablet. I would take my traditional artworks in there and color them, and I'd be like, okay, that's a lot better than if I was to sit here with my pencils and do it. That's a lot better. So yeah, that's definitely one of the things is like if some people they enjoy doing traditional, but I think sometimes you need to just do digital and just try other avenues to see if that'll help you out even more. And that's where I started. I was one of those guys just like, I'm not gonna do digital, I'm gonna stay traditional. And then I did digital, and I was like, okay, I think I'm a little more better at this side of the aisle, so I'm gonna stay here for a little while.
How is that going to play out? Like, how did you write that interaction and that maybe resentment?
Yeah, that was actually one of the more fun things to write, because you're talking about pretty much an angry young man who had been abandoned. And I mean, I don't want to give away all the spoilers of the story, but I mean, she left him with an older couple who were really good people, and she left him with responsible people, but things go sideways. He ended up being raised by another man who was what I call a soldier of God, who was a knight and part of the church. And so he was raised within the confines of the church to be a warrior for the church. And magic is viewed on as evil in this world. Morgana Pendragon is very the definition of magical realism as far as a genre, but it's his learning and coming to grips with his mother and his past and his powers, if he has any, and what that means for him. And so of course you have the political intrigue of like some people like, well, if Arthur's sick, yes, he wants Constantine to succeed, but will she try to usurp him? Yeah, and everyone's keeping a secret. Everyone has a secret. Like I said, I don't want to give away too much because I'm actually like 2/3 of the way of writing issue 2. I mean, I have it all mapped out. So that's, people don't have to worry. It's all outlined out. So it's all there. I know where I'm going. Though occasionally when I get to issue 4, it may be like, no, this is where I thought it was going to end. And I was like, I'm going to change my mind here. I think it needs to end somewhere else. So people will be taking this on a journey with me.
Is there a fine line between confidence and acting?
I think it's very related. I think your best acting comes when you are confident. That's why, I was on a show for a while called The Blacklist, and it's very intimidating being on such a massive production, massive set, massive amounts of people around you. And if you lose your confidence and you start getting nervous based on all that, then your acting is not going to work. So I think confidence is very related, and that's why it's great working with someone like Lisa as a director, because she understands that for an actor to do their best work, they need to feel comfortable. They need to feel safe. Lisa is someone who really provides that. I mean, a lot of other directors are very visually oriented, or they're going this way for this way, but Lisa always made sure that we knew where we were at and that we were present when we started shooting. And so confidence goes hand in hand with safety, which goes hand in hand with good performances.
Because it's a psychological horror film, what exactly is psychology that people can take away from this film?
I think when it comes to the idea of ending your life, it's a very controversial subject, and people are afraid to talk about it. That's why I've been avoiding using the word suicide. That's the word. I think in this film, hitting this subject head on of suicide, which is very difficult, does allow people to talk about it. So I have been part of some interesting conversations after people have watched this film and do bring it up and talk about it. And so I think it's, it could potentially be a good thing that people are talking about that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a level of sort of hypocrisy in this sort of industry, perhaps, about suicide versus you have a film like Terrifier 3, which is super gory and super violent, and things are being cut out of people's stomachs and heads are being taken off and so forth. And yet when it comes to something like self-determination or end of life or euthanasia, then it's like, ooh, we can't touch that. And I feel, listen, if we're gonna protect people's ears and eyes out there, then let's get everything on the table. Let's talk about all of it. And I think, suicide is a big part of society today. And of course, nobody endorses suicide in that way, but there's a lot of talks about euthanasia around the world and the right to self-determination. And so talk and discussion about these items and these issues is always helpful. And I think House of Abraham is going to bring a lot of that to the forefront, and we can have real conversations about it. But it's also, this film doesn't glamorize suicide per se in any shape or form. In fact, I think at some point, one of the characters in the script says, these are murders, not suicides, right? Because it is in the horror world, and it's not meant to be a documentary about suicides. There are plenty of those. This is really about the world of manipulation. And the takeaway from this movie should be about, be careful who you trust when you're at your most vulnerable.
That's awesome. You've done more than just Naruto. You've done Into the Spider-Verse, Barbie, at the Hollywood Bowl, no less, which is an amazing venue for sure. Since you've done all of these amazing venues, looking at the animation to music side of things, how does Naruto's emotional hit points differ from Western scoring?
Oh, that's a great question. In terms of some of these films where it's you start the movie and you go all the way through the end credits, it's all paced according to this one capture of time. And so for Naruto, the cut of the film or what you're watching on screen encapsulates the first 220 episodes. And so it's telling this narrative, that is trying to cover so much material, and the music is then cut to back that up. Some of the music we have is directly taken immediately just from the scene itself. Otherwise, it's music that is superimposed onto it to create an entire experience. So whether you've seen the show or you haven't, it all tells its own story. And how this sort of differs from Western scoring in its own element is that we do have traditional Japanese instruments. We have a shamisen, we have a shakuhachi, and it's going to feel like you're being transported back to watching it when it first came out.
Actually, I was going to ask that here, because the Naruto score blends these amazing instruments, especially from Western and Eastern cultures here. What specific moment in the tour makes you think this is why it went global?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I mean, it's incredible storytelling, first of all, from just a television show perspective, but the music is incredibly catchy. And it offers a ton of energy that I could see any viewer just latching onto. So in terms of going global, the fight sequence music is awesome. We have fun with it every single night. And then on top of that, the moments that are really heartbreaking and beautiful, there are some absolutely gut-wrenching piano solos in this that our keyboardist is just crushing night after night after night. And I think it goes global because it touches on exactly why we keep coming back to art. We want it to make us feel something, and it makes us feel all of the emotions: excited, scared, happy. You know, the Orochimaru theme, that's scary music. It's they did not pull any punches when creating the score for this.
If you had to survive a year inside a crime syndicate, which one would you pick and how would you stay alive?
After doing enough research, I would probably do probably one of the New York families during, I'd have to set it during a period of like the 80s, 70s or 80s, and I would try to diversify. So I would not do the drug business, even though there was a lot of people, another one of the big misconceptions, they talk about not being involved in drugs, and yet a lot of people were involved in selling drugs and things like that to make a lot of money, but there was a lot of danger to that. But I feel like I've done enough research that, assuming I had all of my research ahead of time, still had that information, don't get greedy and don't double cross your boss. If you are making those obscene amounts of money, tuck some of it away or go into a legitimate business. There are some other mobsters who had legitimate businesses who made a lot of money and lived a quiet life at the end, that weren't just killed off or thrown in prison.
What's your process for turning bureaucratic nightmares into advantages?
I'm in the US, so I'm going from a US based perspective here. So it's my change per country. I mean, first of all, I pay attention to the news, not the news with the sensationalist headlines, but I pay attention to the details. And it looks like China at this moment has made certain concessions into things, or apparent concessions towards a certain thing, at least with America, at least like some inroads, some sort of movement. But what I do sometimes, it's like, okay, I don't want to pay this much. And as of this moment in time, it may change later by the time this gets out. At the time, they say comic books or certain printed materials are not going to be charged with tariffs, but other things like game pieces. So if you make game pieces outside of the United States, you go and get that taken care of. You have to deal with the prices on that. Pins, I think, are part of that as well. I don't think lanyards, or if lanyards are, they're not that expensive. And stickers you can kind of get made anywhere. You just have to compare prices and vendors. Most of my stuff, for the most part, is made domestically. And I made that change years ago because some people would say, oh, print in China and all that. But it's like, man, I don't want to keep a huge pallet in my house. And they'd say, well, go rent a storage space. It's like, then I'd spend money renting a storage space. For me, print on demand is easier and much more cost effective, because where I get it printed, I can kind of drop ship it anywhere I want to because they're international, but they have a domestic print shop. And this was years before. And I'm glad I made that decision, because I started looking into, because I was seeing the trend. And if like about 4 or 5 years ago, at least in America, our ports of entry were really blocked up for months on end. So international shipments, which a majority of those things were an issue. Now, shipping from China was actually not bad, because whatever I had to have shipped over, it was air shipped. So that was going to take the time it was going to take after manufacturer. So that didn't change. But I'm glad I went domestically, because a lot of the stuff that I wanted to have made, like my shitty tarot cards from, I think, a Kickstarter or two back, I had a great company domestically, and I just had them all shipped to me, and it wasn't really that expensive considering the price. And I know people are like, want to go and do overseas because it's cheaper. And I'm not dogging you guys because of that. If that fits your needs and that helps you what you need to do, by all means do it. Do whatever it is to fit your business. But for me, it made more sense domestically to get stuff done and ship it in. And I was glad, because I was beginning to see kind of a trend at the time of all this backup, and stuff was backed up for months, and just like people didn't know what to do and everything, and they had to push back dates, whereas I made all my dates consistently because I just took a look at the general atmosphere, said, okay, so it's better for my business to make it here. Like, I understand people want to follow trends in business and be more successful, but the problem with that type of mentality is that you don't do it for you. So it's kind of like you have to do what's right. Like, you have to follow trends, but you have to fit what do what's fit for your business. And it's okay to try new things. I mean, that's just what you need to do as an entrepreneur yourself and a creator if you're doing it on your own. But personally, for me at the time, it was good to do it domestically. I've stayed mostly domestically, but there are some pieces that I do have made in China. And I look at it, it's like, well, I have enough supply for right now until this thing is dealt with. And right now, I'm looking at domestic and other products that I could use too, that would fit people's price points at this moment, because I know like the economy has been tough for a lot of people in generally worldwide as everything sorts itself out. So I am looking at certain small things, and also every time for international customers, because I know shipping internationally can be a bear. I generally will try to go and just give electronic rewards so that it's just a simple quick and go. And you don't need to pay for shipping it. It's an instantaneous disbursement once the Kickstarter has been funded and the money's in the bank account. We get that done.
You've worked in so many different industries. What's one thing that you've taken from animation, biology, the environment, and comic storytelling that someone that's new to the industry would find amazing, fascinating, and maybe help them creatively?
That's a good question. I think whatever discipline or subject matter that you decide to nurture an interest in is going to help you in your creativity of an artist, because the more that you can expand yourself as an artist, the more that you can help your creativity. You know, as I said earlier, an artist is an observer of life, and they use their creativity to give their own personal interpretation of those observations. So the more that you can expose yourself to different topics and subject matter, the more that you can derive inspiration from to come up with those ideas. So that's the crux of the advice I would give somebody.
What about for writing then?
For writing, yeah, well, it's the same thing. I think most authors would probably give you the same advice. The more you know, so the more sources of inspiration that you can draw from, also from life experiences, people that you know, such as I create most of my characters have qualities from people that I've actually known in my life. So, you know, their personalities and their weaknesses and their strengths.
Questions that either we've been asked or that we've been exploring ourselves about how to improve our podcast. And you said, I'm doing all these interviews. And so I'm going to just jump right on in and go, okay, Kurt, tell us this question that you submitted for all of us to sort of ponder and explore. How do you get to that point where you figure out how to ask the right questions of and for your guest? And how do you know when you've done it? How do you know when you've asked the right questions?
And I'm glad you reiterated the question, because I had to look it up myself because I couldn't remember what I had written down. No, asking the right questions is always the most difficult part about being a person. It's not just about being a podcast host, it's about being a person. How do you know what question you need to ask the person to get the answer you are looking for? And out of doing this for like 16 years now, it just comes down to you kind of get a read on people. It's not just the research side of things, that definitely helps matters, but I've always had issues with, am I going too far with my questions, or am I not diving into enough? Are these questions even interesting to the guest itself? And so I think a lot of trial and error has happened in regards to finding the right questions for a variety of guests. It's not just for who you're speaking to at that particular time. Because I've been doing interviews in entertainment, specifically with comics, TV, film, music, and video games, I've had to actively make a list of just general questions for every industry so that I can kind of dive back into it if my research doesn't come up with any good questions. But there's times when those questions don't actively allow you to dive deep enough. So you have to go off the cuff. You have to actively think, is something they've said in this interview, will that generate a new question? And will that bring you to a new level of understanding of that guest, or bring you on a completely different train track you didn't realize you're going to go to in your interview? So it's a little trial and error, but research helps, at least in my opinion. And is the guest passionate about themselves and wants to answer questions? Sometimes you have to, unfortunately, pull teeth with some guests, but metaphorically speaking. But I mean, that aside, you do your best with what you have to work with.
For sure. And what you just said, just the thing that leapt into my mind was listening skills. And I've been on your show as a guest, and you have amazing listening skills. That's one of the, if you're a podcaster and or a new podcaster and you want to get better, sharpen those listening skills, because being in the moment with your guests, being fully present and really listening to ask good questions is one of the key things that you can do, in my opinion, to improve how you interview people. But I'm going to turn it over to the other two guests today. Reena, why don't you tell us what you think as far as how you come up with your very amazing and in-depth questions? Because I've been a guest on your show too, and wow, did we go deep.
It's funny because I was getting ready to compliment both you and Kurt. I actually listened back to those interviews because I feel like when you do a good job being a guest on someone's show, you can listen to what you liked from other interviews when you're preparing for another interview. So I frequently do that. As far as asking the right questions, some of my ninja techniques are stalking people's social media prior to interviewing them, seeing what they're most recently talking about. Also, I like to, since I'm the host of the Better Call Daddy show, tie it back into the theme of my show. So a lot of times I'll either ask, what was your relationship like with your dad? Tell me a daddy story. Is there any wisdom that you've gleaned from your own father? And if you don't have a relationship with your dad, is there anything like you wish you could have asked a father? Those types of things. So even for your show, Kurt, like you said, you've generated questions back to specific industries that you interview. I think that that's a good idea. Maybe even highlight, hey, this person I know from the comic book world. And, what do you have in common with that person? Sometimes, like when I've interviewed celebrities, like when I worked on the Judge Alex show or when I worked on the Jerry Springer show or some of these reality TV hosts that I've had on, I try to notice something about them that we either have in common. Like when I interviewed the host of the Jewish Matchmaking, I noticed that she always wore a necklace. So I was like, hey, what's the meaning behind that necklace? I noticed you always wear that piece. Or, hey, I noticed that you're wearing Micah fashion. I have a Micah fashion dress too. Or when I interviewed Jerry Springer, I was like, hey, remember that trip to Jamaica? I went on that with you, right? So I try to bring up things that we have in common that the audience might find interesting, that we share those things.
What is the most horrifying real detail you included that hits too close to home for readers?
There's definitely some stuff here might be, my lawyer would advise me to say everything is, all fictional, but obviously, everything is based where we come from. And the issues that we deal with in Upkeep, I want them to be very close to real life issues. Primarily, the first issue, which deals about it even more than the second issue, is about housing. It's about trying to find a place. In the first issue, someone was living next to a terrible neighbor. We've all been there. Every single person ever has lived next to a, maybe the person's above you or below you or beside you or the person across the street, but there's always someone who you're like, I gotta watch out for this guy. This guy's gonna kill me. Watching to see when they're outside their house so I don't go. Or, there's always something. You gotta put a bit of that in there, and I feel like that's quite relatable. But Upkeep 2 shifts the conversation a little bit from housing, even though it still stays on that, into daycare. I have 2 kids. My eldest is just finishing elementary school. When I started looking for daycare for her, it was just so difficult in Toronto. I don't know how it is in everywhere else. I imagine smaller towns might be a different story than the bigger cities, but certainly in Toronto, and Upkeep is a very Toronto-based story. It generalizes especially well to large cities, Vancouver, San Francisco, New York. Finding childcare, affordable childcare, is extremely hard sometimes. That's what I wanted to write about here. Once they got the house, that's great. So now what do you have? Oh, you got to get your kid in daycare. So you got to find a spot and you got to be able to afford a spot. And that's an interesting question to contrast with the idea of you have a house that can give you anything you want. Every issue goes 1 year forward in time. Issue 1, they just move into the house. Issue 2, they've been there for almost a year. Their son's a year older. They've gotten time to enjoy it. They're getting into things. And so I want it to be a long story that tells the story of raising a family in a place of privilege, but with a dark underlying. Even if you get everything you want, even if you have this wonderful life, there is an inherent wickedness. There is a cost to it that maybe you don't have to pay. Maybe somebody else has to pay, but I don't know, man. Like, you might have to pay some of that cost at the end of the day, too. So that's the shtick for upkeep and for Garrison Manor. We'll talk more about the manor, I'm sure, as we get into this. Yeah.
What's a song Saoirse would hate but secretly need?
A song that she would hate but secretly need. Okay, well, since Saoirse comes out of my own brain, probably be something like really popular and a huge hit, like One Headlight by the Wallflowers. It'd be, oh, is it Jumper by Third Eye Blind? That I wish you would step off from that ledge, my friend. That would actually be really into Saoirse because she does need to step off that ledge. The people around her would understand. Because I hate that in stories where there's like needless conflict. You gotta stop doing that, McTaggart. And you're just like, what? I much prefer conflict with a bit of nuance. McTaggart, I know you need to do that, but you can't do it that way. Oh, okay. Now we don't have to have this stupid fight. We can get down to the more interesting question of like, is the cop losing his soul? Has he become a bad cop? Is he using too much force? That's way more nuanced and interesting. Jumper by Third Eye Blind would be a song that she would hate. But then if she actually listened to it, she'd be like, I get what you're trying to say to me. Maybe I am on the ledge. That is a big part of this story. I would never have thought this interview was going to go anywhere near Third Eye Blind.
Gonna have to tag him in this interview.
Yeah, sure. Why not? They might have kids who read books. Let's go with Third Eye Blind, not the Goo Goo Dolls. I've got a Third Eye Blind or the Goo Goo Dolls. So I know that the Heroes of Buffalo, I just can't. I just won't let myself see it. No more middle of the road 90s semi-alternative.
I'm a big advocate of people expressing themselves and engaging in creative activities.
Which kind of segues into the MN CBA. Let's talk about that here because I think that's interesting. I've never been to any Midwest shows, so I don't know anything about this particular show. And you being the president, I think you're the perfect person to ask. What is MN CBA and how did you get involved with this?
So the organization started, and it went through a lot of changes and iterations over its lifespan. The actual organization as a contiguous entity has existed in some form for over 30 years. It originally was a group of comic book guys who decided to start a convention here in the Twin Cities in the late 80s. They ran it through the early 90s. It grew pretty quickly. There weren't a lot of serious comic book conventions in town at that time. Of course, for those who might not know, Twin Cities is a combination of Minneapolis and St. Paul. A guy named Dominic Postleone, he referred to as Mick Post, ran the show for a number of years. He was connected to the Minnesota State Fair. His family ran the 1919 root beer booth at the fair, and he brought the convention to the fairgrounds, where it grew to a considerable size and then sort of plateaued. He passed away unexpectedly in later 2014, shortly before I started my midlife crisis and set off on my own chain of events. In May of 2015, I came up here for the spring show. The show sort of lost its footing following Nick's death. He was one of those larger than life personalities, and he really was the glue that was holding it together. And he was also funding a lot of the organization's operations. So his absence caused a lot of difficulty. For shows that have a similar feel, you might say it's somewhere between Heroes, which is very focused on comics and comic creators, and something like Small Press Expo that's focused on indie books and smaller creators. The Twin Cities has a very strong comic book scene. We have World Monster headquarters here. Xander Cannon, Elliot Rahal, John Bivens. It's a huge group. We have MCAD, lots of really talented students coming out of MCAD, the comics program there. I identified the show as something very unique It's very non-commercial. They don't bring in celebrities. They didn't focus on some of the very big, expensive, flashy stuff that larger shows do. There's not a media presence like you see with the Reed Pop shows or San Diego Comic-Con. There was a group of 3 volunteers mainly leading the show after Nick passed away. I kind of in the background had started volunteering because I was identifying areas where the organization could be modernized, where it could be advertised better. I was very interested in giving it more of a presence on the national stage so that we would be able to bring in a more variety of guests and be able to expand what we were offering our local attendees. And then COVID was really the last straw for that. They had obviously had to cancel shows in response to COVID, and there's still expenses you have to pay year round, even when the show is not happening. Your web hosting costs, your storage unit, your email software, just all of those things. And it didn't really make it. The fellow that had been running it most recently said, maybe it's time to pull the plug on this, and he shut it down. And my friend Steve Henniger is another longtime volunteer, almost from the beginning, and he said, no, I don't want this to end. He decided to restart it, and I've said this before, but I was like, now's my chance. I'm going to do this now or it's never going to happen. Well, I came back on board and had to convince everyone to allow me to make a logo and do the branding and all that. Not really planned, but ultimately resulted in kind of a passing of the torch from the older generation that had been running the show previously, newer generation of creators, which, you know, I'm 45, I'm old enough, but I'm still younger and relatively fresh blood. It eventually became clear to me that to accomplish the things that I want to do, I needed to have the ability to steer the ship and help guide people in the right direction. To Steve's credit, I think he was able to recognize that it was time to let someone else kind of guide things and start to set direction and tone. And my main goal is bringing the organization together to have its own identity, which obviously from the struggles after Nick passed away, it didn't have that. For this to be something that survives me when I can't do it anymore, it has to have procedures that are in place, written down. I want to make an employee handbook, basically, for the volunteers. Everything I do is thoroughly documented. I do a lot, but it's all documented. There's spreadsheets. We recently moved all our volunteers to a Slack chat. We have an app system for managing scheduling for the meetings and shifts for volunteering. It was just sort of a process of attrition where I got involved and gradually became more involved until, you know, I'm the one that is both able and willing to do the work it takes right now to keep this thing going, and hopefully find the right people over time to step into different roles so that eventually it can belong to everyone that is involved.
It's amazing the creativity of every guest that I have on the show. Everyone is just focused on what do I want to make that people will enjoy.
A lot of when I'm writing, it's strange because my primary audience is me. Like I'm writing something that I think will be interesting. And then the next stage for me is anyone else going to connect with this? Like, am I so far up my own whatever that no one is going to understand this reference? No one is going to find this weird, intricate thing that I'm exploring interesting. I don't mean it to sound egotistical when I say I'm writing for myself, because I think that you have to be really interested in your story in order for other people to be interested. If you're just dashing something off and it's, you know, genre of the week or whatever, because you know people like this style of work, if there's nothing of you inside of it, then I find it can be very hollow to read and hard to connect with. But if I read something that someone was clearly passionate about, even if I'm not passionate about it, I can connect with their passion, even if I don't connect with the subject matter. And so I try to find that passion in myself when I'm creating something. And then the next stage is like, well, this is passionate, but is it obtuse? And like then I gotta make it readable for other people, or at least understandable. And what was interesting with this book is I'm working with an artist named I.E. Santiana Hernandez for the first time, and he's younger than I am by a fair margin. I'd say about 15 years. And so I was a teenager in the 90s. I've got these cultural references. I know what hairstyles look like and how people talked and how they dressed. Although since we're in school uniforms, that's a little bit easier. I had to talk him through that. And I had to interrogate myself to be able to explain to him how things worked. I couldn't just assume, oh, he knows what bands were popular. He knows that you couldn't wear a mohawk to a private school. Turns out he didn't. So like we had to do some corrections on some of the early art when we're working on layout. And it was fun because it also, by having an outside perspective like that from him as an artist, I have to look at things for a second or a third time and be like, what kind of weird assumptions am I making here that are going to trip up the reader?
So then how is being a tattoo artist and translate to your visual medium? Because I know you primarily work with black and white, but do you add a splash of color into it? Is there something about tattooing on skin versus drawing on a page that just really inspires your creativity?
The nice thing about tattooing is I moved to New York City from DC to make it as a comic artist. And I was like, in the meantime, I had a friend of my brother's who was a tattoo artist. He's like, that guy should tattoo. So he taught me how to tattoo, and I started tattooing. And at first I was thinking, yeah, I'll just keep at this until I make it as a comic artist. But then I really like the community. It kind of reminded me of when I go to punk rock shows and stuff, like we have our own community. So it felt like we had our own community. Like we're all freaks together, we're all into being individuals, doing our own thing. So I really like that, and it really encouraged people to be artists. When I first started tattooing, this is in '98. Now it seems like a long time. I remember it was just breaking out from that old school thing of you pick something off the wall, you got a little design on you, to you could do big, colorful stuff and realistic stuff. And I was kind of the quote horror tattoo artist. People would even come to me, they'd be like, yeah, I want you to do a portrait, but if you can make her more kind of like the girl from The Exorcist. I'm like, dude, you don't have to pitch it to me. People would try to bring me horror stuff all the time. All I'm saying is a very accepting community. And actually, it really helped me express myself a lot. It did a lot for me. It's that's where I met my wife, who unfortunately didn't hit and run. But, it did help me with a lot of stuff.
There's a few movies. They are some classic kung fu movies of the 70s and 80s, which I'm using as guiding principles. These are movies that are both horrors and comedies, which is a unique thing kung fu movies can pull off uniquely. I'm telling you first, Kurt. One of the movies that you should check out is called Mr. Vampire. And another one, it's the 7 brothers and 1 sister versus Dracula. And that movie in particular is a fun one because that is actually a co-production between the Shaw brothers, who are famous for all the kung fu movies we've heard about, and Hammer horror films. Do you remember those Hammer horror Dracula movies? It's a crossover between both of those movie production studios. The Dracula that you're thinking is the Dracula that takes a trip to China for that kung fu action.
If you could distill one life philosophy or business lesson from Fella's story that you've applied to your own creative career, what would it be?
If you look at Fella's life, right, started with jazz, right, and then he moved into high life, and then eventually to Afrobeat. The Afrobeat sound sort of evolved when he kind of got the right ingredients of what he wanted to champion. What that teaches me is that he was constantly learning and iterating and growing. Even when he became a superstar, he was never stagnant. He was always growing. And that's something I've sort of incorporated into my life and what I've learned as a professional in what I do and as an artist, to not pigeonhole myself to being just a specific type of artist. Just I want to continue growing, continue learning, continue to contribute to different ways of expressing myself. artistically.
Oh, it's really nice, Joel. I'm sitting here going like, do I have the like depth of self like awareness to really be taking lessons? No, I mean, I think like one thing that pops to mind is just the fact that Fela, he didn't care about the consequences. He was pretty fearless. He was fortunate enough to come from a middle class family. He knew he had a leg up. He was aware of the privilege that he had. And I think one of the things I really appreciate about him, and actually kind of reminds me of my dad, was just he didn't let his own personal privilege blind him to the realities of the world around him. I think it's very easy. And it's not just, people work hard, right? People who are successful work hard. Even people who started, quote unquote, on third base. Well, most of those people are working really hard to get what they want, right? I'm not trying to sit here and be like, oh, if you were born into privilege, everything was easy. It's not true, but it is easier. There's that whole idea of like internal resources and external resources. Internal resources being, who you are as a person, your drive, your intelligence, creativity, and external resources are like, what did you start with? Who do you know? What access do you get? And I think Bill was just had this unique ability to both be aware of how hard he worked, of what he created. He created something absolutely incredible, and yet very clearly aware of the fact that he might have made it no matter what, but that a lot of people who could have been quite successful, but they didn't start with the external resources necessary, and so they kind of fell by the wayside. And I really appreciate the fact that as he moved into a position of being an elite, because he really was. I mean, he was arguably the most famous man in Africa for quite some time. He never left Nigeria, right? He stayed in the same neighborhood. He stayed with his people. He fought for his people. And he was just so clear on this idea that he wanted everybody to have this better life, not just the chosen few. And I really respect that. I mean, I think, Jabola, you were the one who kind of brought that point to me of like, yeah, he never left. And he could have left. He could have left so many times. It would have been better for his career. It would have made him more money. He could have told himself he would have been able to do even more good because he would have had a bigger platform. And who knows, that could have even been true. But he was just determined to just be with his people and to use the privilege that he had been given and the privilege he had earned to just help those around him. It's just at the core. And I think it's why, if you read the book, you're going to find out that sometimes Fela can be absolutely maddening. He can have ridiculous opinions. He can be stubborn as a goat. Going back to Jabola's animal reference, right? He can be arrogant and cruel sometimes. But I think the reason why people stayed with him is because he did have this unshakable love for humanity. And that's inspiring. And I think sometimes it's easy to sort of, especially in these fractured times, it's really easy to want to start hating people. And I just don't think it's particularly productive. It doesn't mean you don't call people to account. It doesn't mean you don't fight for what you believe in. But I think as soon as you start really looking, especially as a lefty, and I'm a lefty, like if the whole message is we want to have a more tolerant, inclusive world, then you got to try to live that, and you got to try to have little wins when you can, and you got to have good faith negotiations and conversations with anybody who's willing to have them with you. And I think Fela, we did imagine a scene where Fela and the prime antagonist in the book, which is a general Obasanjo, who's a real person, but we kind of made him a composite character of all these different military generals to make things a little simpler. And we did have this conversation where the two of them are talking. And it was important for both Jabola and I not only to give the antagonist a real clear point of view, like this man, even though he's the enemy, is actually in his way trying to do what he thinks is best for Nigeria. Like we both were like, we believe that about Obasanjo. But it was also important for us that Fela would actually engage with him in a real conversation. And it falls to pieces because they're just too far apart in terms of what they believe the future should look like. But we both really believe that, yeah, Fela would have sat down and talked to him. He would have thought he would have got in thinking he was an idiot, and he would have been, in his mind, proven right, but he would have had a real conversation about it. And I think that's powerful. I think that's important.
So when I write stuff, I'm kind of sometimes I call them like pantsers. That's a term some people use, basically writing by the seat of your pants, because I like to find something as I'm going as well. So like, for example, in the first issue, I was like, well, in the scene at the beginning, I was like, you know what? We got to put somebody in the town who's listening to these people talk. And then he runs off into the alley and he's like in a shadowy cloak. And I was like, well, who is that? Well, I don't know, but I'll find out. Most of these characters sort of, they just emerged from the setting. In these first two comics, I told Igor, he's one of the reasons why I wanted to work with him was because he's very good at world building for his own stuff. So I was like, hey, this guy, I was like, just go to town. You know, it's barbarian theme that they go into called the Blustering Blowfish. The proprietor of it is named Wolf Foxhound. He has a bunch of skeletons up on the wall of fish, just basically things that he's hunted. And of course, you know, he's missing one of his hands and he has a hook. It's a Moby Dick reference, you know. Igor, he takes all that stuff and he really just goes to town with it. And he just drew them when he was showing that the town the family is set in is called Lethum. And when he started developing that town at the very beginning, he would put in all these sort of strange characters. I did know that I was going to have 3 characters, and those were the mom, the dad, and the boy. And like I said, I did it during COVID. My wife and myself and my son, we had just moved back to Seattle from Hawaii. And 6 months later, we get, shellacked by COVID. And like my wife was onboarding remotely to a new job. And my son and I, we were stuck in an apartment, like everybody else. I had to somehow digest that situation. You know what I mean? The mom is kind of like my wife, the dad is kind of like me, and then the boy is kind of like my son. So their names are Brom Berserk is the boy, Bjorn Berserk is the dad, and Brunhild Berserk is the mom. As you know, there's a trope called the rage trope for berserkers. I use that as a metaphor for ADHD because both my son and I have pretty severe ADHD. And so one of the things I wanted to do was make it a little bit therapeutic about how, the 2 characters, this barbarian rage ability, it goes through his family, through the berserks, which is a patrilineal line. Then he has to learn not only how to unlock it, but also how to control it. That's one of the recurring themes of the comic, is about how do we control our impulses, be our best selves so that we can create a healthy family and a healthy community. I'm really into the community aspect of it. As you mentioned, and this is what set me off in this long tangential speech, was that, there's so many funny characters in there.
And the world that they live in, the fact that you have a great world building, you said you could write side stories of all these amazing characters, and you have your main cast still, and you're still writing amazing works here. What is it about historical America that just influences your world building? What makes it so special to you?
Well, it probably started with the fact that I have bachelor's degrees in politics. Kind of a side note was American history.
Okay.
And what really brought me to it was BMS is an American story. And when it was first developed, so many of the steampunk type stories were set in Victorian England. Many still are, but it's vastly expanded to around the world and multicultural, which is great.
Yeah.
It's way more interesting, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
It's grounded in the American psyche. It was I already knew a lot about American history, but obviously I had to dig more, and a lot of the stuff I learned, many years ago. So it's like, okay, refresher course and digging into aspects that, they never teach you in high school or college. I love history. So, I mean, that's really what it came down to, is I love history. It was just all of the elements just kind of intertwined that piqued my interest, because I love science fiction. I love history. I do try to make the science accurate, right, if I can. If I can't, the story has to take precedent. So sure, obviously there's going to be some fudging, but there'll be little bits in there that if someone knows that particular science, they'll go like, oh, that's right. That's right. Even the bonus material I add on to the individual issues, which is different than what goes in the trades. I usually talk about the history. For A Mystery at Pikes Peak, issues 1 and 2, there's bonus material on, the Chinese Exclusionary Act, which, they don't teach anymore. And I posit in my world that never happened, which allowed the Chinese great houses to flourish in California because of that. Because I wanted to take a look at what would we look like as a nation if that never happened.
Yeah.
On the science side, I actually in issues 3 and 4, I added a little bit on a particular, I don't want to give away spoilers, but I talk a little bit about an element that's part of, it's actually on the periodic table, that the readers will be introduced to if they've never heard of it before. I was like, yes, it is real. And I give little footnotes of like, yeah, if you want to go check it out, here are the footnotes, go crazy, have fun.
Is that still like that for you when you look upon not only the world, but also classic paintings? Do you still find wonder in art?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like I would say every few months we end up going to the art gallery on the free night and having a walk around and visit the paintings we like, And what you're saying there about color as well, I love that. Like I love to play with color, like the complementary opposite colors and things like that. You'll often see in like my traditional art is like a blue tree, like because it's the contrast to the other thing. Now I know there aren't blue trees out there, unless you maybe have a few beers. It's to sell like the energy of the moment, and it adds a certain something for me. Yeah.
So how does that help you in terms of color theory with your comic Helga's Horns?
Well, previously with other comic books, I found that I was making a palette that was very yellow and oversaturated. So I wanted to make it more kind of, there's that word again, it's coming to my mind, gritty, like slightly less saturated, like different color palette that I wouldn't have used before. And also to do with like, I do like cell shading on the characters for the colors. And I had a technique that I was using before, and it was duplicating the color layer and then laying it on top and then adjusting like the opacity stuff and that. It did the job, but looking back on it, I'm like, no, I wish I hadn't have done that. And then I went with another version where it was the colors and then grayscaled and then put that on top. But then it made it too gray, and then when you printed it, sometimes it didn't give the same results that you were seeing on the screen. From that, I'd seen someone online was doing a demonstration, and that what I ended up doing was desaturating, and it was a grayscale, and then overlaying a color, so it made it a duotone that sat on top for the shadows, and it's like bing, the light bulb came on. That's the interesting thing. Like you're always chasing what's going to be like the new thing that you're attached to, like the dirty bits and the color palette.
Creating music for your own film is something that I could never do. It's not in my wheelhouse whatsoever. But talk about your musicality when it came to season 1 and season 2, and what did you draw from to create this amazing score, or these amazing scores, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, so seasons 1 and 2 are very different in terms of the score. Season 2, the score is much bigger. I would say it's much more classical in terms of the instrumentation. Like it pulls a lot more from modern film scores. Whereas season 1, I was experimenting a little bit more. For me, music is such a powerful storytelling element, and in independent film, it's one that's consistently overlooked. I was learning piano before I had ever touched the camera in my life. And so music was really my first love, my first, storytelling element. It's a joy to get to bring it into film. And I use it on set a lot, actually. When I am writing these projects like The Sunrise House or like some of my other stuff, like some of my older films like Reality or, Torrent Rising, I'll come onto them with themes already written and recorded. And I'll be able to sit the actors down and play these things for them. and it gives them a feel for the, you know, the vibe of the project, the feeling of it, in a way that my words I don't think ever could. Because like I said, I you know, I can struggle sometimes with communicating verbally on set, and to be able to just be like, okay, this moment here should feel like this piece of music, and to be able to just hit play on something that I had made and have the actors go, okay, I get it, and then they nail it in the next take. It's just such a beautiful feeling for me to be able to be like, okay, I used the tools I had to communicate. You know, yay, go me. I mean, I did a show in college called One Door Over, and the main theme of that, before, you know, we were on like the second episode, and people would be on set humming it.
Nice.
But before we literally hadn't gotten to the third episode, and people would be humming it because it's really catchy. It's called the Berkshire theme. You can find it on any streaming service. But the more important part of it is that it captures the essence of the show, of the relationships between the characters. It's this kind of light, bouncy theme that also elicits a feeling of kind of bittersweet loss. Without me saying that, the actors were able to hear it and go, okay, yeah, no, it's like this. And they would say roughly what I just said. And so on the Sunrise House, I did the exact same thing. There's this main theme that kind of circulates throughout it that I played for the actors beforehand. They were able to understand what I wanted to communicate without me actually having to say it out loud. And then just to get to go into post-production, and because I have no time limit, because I'm the producer and I can, you know, set my own schedule for it, to really be able to experiment and be like, okay, what if I just use this weird instrument here? What if I just like go and look through this like library of people, you know, hitting a stick on a violin? What does that sound like? And how can I use it? And I think that there's even one instrument that I used at one point that's a recording of like an ultrasound, like stretched out and retuned. People just make these things, and I think it's called like Piano Book. They'll just make these free sample instruments, and so I would just like download them in batches and just play around. And the second season, it's much more like stereotypical Hollywood, but it is also much larger. And season 2 in general is much larger, and I think that's why I made that choice to go a little bit more contemporary. But season 1, it's supposed to feel weird and unsettling and cramped and claustrophobic. And so there's not a lot of normal instruments, so to speak, other than piano, which of course, you know, is my main instrument, so it's throughout everywhere. There's a lot of weirdness in it, which was so fun to do.
Interviews are open for 2026. Look at this link here below. It's calendly.com/Two Geeks Talking. Schedule today. Schedule as early as you can. As of right now, Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's adjusted to your specific time zone. Free slots are available. Paid interviews give you a variety of options as well. Those are openings from Monday to Sunday, 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. Eastern time, adjusted for your time zone when you schedule. And go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. Like, subscribe, and share the channel with people that you think would benefit from the interviews that we have on the show. Thank you again for all of your support, and I look forward to interviewing you in 2026.